Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the DS Show. I'm joined by a really good friend out of the Bay Area. Please welcome my good friend Subbu. Welcome to the show.
Hi, folks. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. Well, thanks for coming on the show today, and really looking forward to this conversation. I know our paths originally crossed, I think now maybe a year ago, or maybe potentially a year and a half ago,
A
at one
little
of the
over that. Yeah.
recent, one of the recent Anaplan Connect events where we first met, and I think we had a really good, interesting chat about just state of the universe and kind of where things are with
Mm.
the ecosystem. And the past year and a half, things have really come a long way. But before we kind of dive into all of that, first of all, just for our audience, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, your background, maybe pre-Anaplan, what you were doing, how you got into the ecosystem, and what you're working on today?
So, Subbu Kuchibhotla, I've got a rich experience across multiple industries and multiple functions. My leadership skills and all come from Procter& Gamble, one of the best companies I ever worked for. Started off in distribution and manufacturing IT there. Even before people knew what Oracle or SAP was, we built out their standardization modules and also the compliance modules for pharma. So started my journey there. Then I moved to Puerto Rico, did a couple of startups, AOL Puerto Rico and a military aircraft engineering startup for UTC Pratt & Whitney, both successful and reacquired by the motherships. And then I worked for Merck, also picked up my Spanish or Spanglish in Puerto Rico, and then moved back to the US, again working with HP, but really for Procter & Gamble, who's a hire entry and promote from within company. So I joined HP to modernize all of their executive comp systems, Wall Street reporting systems, and also look at how to build virtual walls for billion-dollar products, even before social became a thing, using BE Aqualogic, which is now Oracle. Then kind of sold a big 10-year, $10 billion deal to Alcatel-Lucent as part of HP Services, and was managing that account for the US before moving to the Bay Area, San Fran Bay Area. I was mostly in the East Coast and international, including an expat to Panama before I moved to the Bay Area. And then I handled that third largest Mickey Mouse account compared to the 10-year, $10 billion deals, which were Procter and Alcatel-Lucent, which was Symantec, was a 7-year, $330 million deal. So I was doing that before I switched to Kaiser Permanente to manage their electronic medical record systems, then moved on to KPMG to build healthcare life sciences practice, which then led me to somebody who knew Anaplan and Frank Calderoni, who was ex-CFO of Cisco, was taking over there, and I was doing a Cisco finance transformation. So that led to an introduction, and I joined Anaplan, was there for a brief period until they went public or just before that, and then took some personal time off. And then I'm at a startup now for the last 4 or 5 years, driving computer vision and AI for manufacturing. It's VC funded, and we hopefully can continue the journey. That's where it is. Long
Yeah,
answer, but hopefully that covered across all of the functions and stuff that I've done.
yeah, that's really fascinating. Because one of the just themes that I always find fascinating with your story is like you've kind of dabbled in so many different things, right? Like can you explain sort of what the motivation was behind that? Like, did these things find you, or is these things you were looking for?
So essentially, if you look at big companies or startups, it was always about transformative or disruptive change, not do things for the sake of doing it. But it also followed my academic credentialing. So if you look at it, I was a civil environmental engineer to begin with, a licensed PE. So I was at state of Florida, and they did my green card. Then I moved to PNG because I'd finished an MIS master's. It's my second one. And then I finished an MBA while I was at P&G. So that drove me into all the business dealings with startups and Merck and everything else, which was more around marketing and strategic marketing and finance. And then I did a law degree as well that I completed last year. So it's kind of like now I'm trying to figure out how to leverage across the skill sets of engineering, law, information systems, and business. I only don't have a medical degree yet. So I'm trying to figure out something in the medical field so I can say I'm a full STEAM person.
Yeah, one thing is I think that's clear is like you have a passion for learning and for acquiring complementary or perhaps just a wide array of skills, right? And but
Well, what I find is all these skills are transferable, regardless of the industry. Many of these disruptive or forward-leading changes are something that people really want folks who understand and can forge a path versus say, I'm just going to stay where it's a comfort zone. Even now, when you look at
mm,
Gen AI, which is the latest version of AI, it's becoming commoditized for the LLMs and all. How are you going to drive business value is always the elixir, right? And there's only 3 things that matter in business. 1, revenue. 2, margin. Are you making it at a good margin? And what's the free cash flow that you can either invest back into the business or give the people who trust in you to make money?
And so in terms of the skill sets, you would say that are kind of your cornerstone, skill sets as you've gained along the journey. What are kind of those big pillars you feel like that really ground you in terms of being transferable across different functions or industries?
So I would say that being able to lead, right? There's a difference between managing people and leading people. And leading people doesn't mean you take a machete and run through the forest by yourself, and nobody has a clue where you're headed or want to follow. So leading is about paving that path as well as making sure other people feel safe coming down that. So that, I think, is the leadership quality that came from Procter and Gamble. Doesn't matter what particular function or company or size of company that you're leading. It's more about, can you build that, right? So it goes back to, can you have integrity, which translates into being honest to people. And honest doesn't mean brutal or putting them down. And then that builds trust by automation, right? I mean, by automatic means. And that drives the leadership quality, right? Because people then say, hey, I think this person is meaning what they say and willing to walk the talk. So I should be able to lead that. And the last thing comes from knowing that, there's a million ways to get to Rome, and you might know only 3 or 4 of them. So be respectful that other people might have other pathways, and be humble enough to listen and adapt, because that's a big thing that many leaders miss. They just think it's my way or the highway. And I don't think that really works out too well in the long run.
Yeah, I feel like those are really just words of wisdom there that, I think sometimes we kind of get caught in, as leaders, sometimes you get caught in your own kind of tunnel vision, right? And sometimes there's a great idea sitting right there with somebody else that, they have even shared it with you, but have you acted upon it?
And open to new experiences, right? Because many times we live in our past success, which is not a guarantee of future success, but we forget that the present is where you're picking up things and learning and adapting. It's not about the past or the future. It's like, in the present, what do you do? And then the future will shape itself. Past is meant to be never forgotten or forgiven. It's only meant not to be repeated if it's a bad experience. If it's a good one, you can try to repeat it, but time always changes things. You just can't repeat and rinse and repeat all the time, especially in business when things change all the time.
Yeah, it's I guess the theme there is like really just you've got all your past experiences, but are you able to kind of stay in the present, stay in the moment, and then
And people term it as mindfulness nowadays, but mindfulness is what you cultivate, right? Because you always have to remember you're every day at ground zero, regardless of whether you're the CEO or the janitor. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's fascinating. Now, kind of to segue into where we like our networks and our skill sets kind of overlap is within the Anaplan space. So, can you talk a little bit more about just how your experience was first when you got into the Anaplan ecosystem and how you have seen it progress to today?
So, I mean, I would say when I joined, it was just a new leadership coming in under Frank, and we were trying to define what it was when you said planning, right? Because most of the people still believe Excel was the tool of choice, and I don't think people have strayed away that far from it either, even now. But it was like, how do you put that story together? And unfortunately, SAP had the integrated business planning suite, so we had to come up with this phrase, or the marketing leader then came up with the phrase connected planning. But we had to figure out what is the story or the category building that you would do around it. And fast forward now, everybody believes that's a category, right? But back then, you were saying like, I'm going to create a category called connected planning and associate a tagline to it, a story to it that sticks and can, grow in the marketplace. And it has, right? To a certain extent now, everybody says connected planning for enterprise performance management. And what is enterprise performance management? At the highest level is tying to your strategic plan and your operating plan, again, like revenue, margin, and free cash flow across all the business units that constitute each of those lines, like revenue, sales, and marketing generally, or the front office. The margin is all around the mid office, whether you call it engineering in a product company or whether you want to call it supply chain in a company that makes actual physical product. And then you have the free cash flow, which is like, hey, are you returning it to shareholders? Or are you investing in the business? What exactly is your growth prospects, right? And that's where I think connected planning hit, to me, was the core. And then we started building it out as saying, what is strategic, what is operational, and then what is execution, right? So we kind of build what back then were called the curly cues, and now the honeycombs and all, saying, this is a journey. In any particular planning sequence, you have a strategic objective, then you have execution parameters against that, and operational KPIs, and all of that have to tie together within that function or that subunit of that function. And then across all functions, being able to relate that on real time is where Anaplan unleashed the magic. And I know there's a lot of other competitors now, but Anaplan was a leader in that segment when we got started off.
Nice. Now, can you talk a little bit about? You mentioned kind of the progression. Like, where do you see things today? Like, and talk a little bit about the competitor landscape too, if you have any insights into that.
Sure. I would say, private equity has brought a lot of changes to Anaplan to be lean, mean, and a good fighting machine. Of course, the bigger macro change has been the advent of Gen AI or AI advancement in general, because people only associate AI with Gen AI, but there's a lot of other things like deep learning and all, and algorithms and machine learning, which I think are components that are advancing the cause of enterprise performance management or planning, connected planning. And I think Anaplan is still in a good spot, but the challenge always for Anaplan has been to get rid of the moniker that it's Excel on steroids, which took a while. And then the second one was to figure out how to be more out of the box ready, for lack of a better word, because it was so powerful. It
Yes.
could be customized, and a lot of, I think, customers were getting confused, saying, I wish it was something out of the box that I can run with. And some of the competitors play to that. They might not have the scale, but they can get an entry point. And whether you call it Pigment or any of the old ones, like Workday, which acquired Adaptive Insights, or any of the others, they have an in, because they can be able to like either make it specific to a process or specific to a industry more, say, and say, we can be quote unquote cheap and not as confusing. So I think that is the challenge that Anaplan is trying to overcome, but it has been around in the market for a while. The Excel on steroids, I think, has died down, because everybody understands Excel is still not gone away, and all of these planning tools still have a import export out of Excel, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think Excel is probably going to be here to stay, even as we roll out into the future. Like, and kind of we touched on that out of the box. You mentioned that, right? And that was kind of one of the things we are realizing is just the nature of the industry sort of shifting to more of these out of the box, pre-built, third-party applications in the ecosystem. Can you talk a little bit about what that sort of progression means, in your opinion, and where that takes
For
that
me,
honeycomb idea you were mentioning earlier?
Well, for me, it's not unique to Anaplan, right? I think all SaaS businesses are under the gun right now, saying this old model of software upgrades or subscription-based billing is going to go away, given the advent of Gen AI, or what they call now agentic AI, right? Where it's just in time, smart enough to figure out the next best action on its own with RAG learning or even unsupervised learning to that extent, right? So you can see, for example, Salesforce now saying Agent Force is a big thing for us, because we kind of like see our old way of growing, selling Salesforce licenses be in trouble. Will it play out? I don't know, because Agentforce itself has had a very slow uptake. But the dynamics of the entire segment of industry where you're selling software has changed, and every entity, whether they're the leader in that quadrant or a follower, have tried to figure out how to adapt to it and make sure that from descriptive to prescriptive in terms of how the systems work, that they become more predictive. Like I said, the next best action. Don't tell me what I already know, which is descriptive, like my past, or prescriptive, saying this might be something that might affect you in the future, versus give me a better predictive engine to be able to say that is the most likely outcome and this is the action you should take, or the choice of actions you have.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and just the nature of AI, how it's coming into so many different industries so quickly, and the advancement of technology, particularly the speed at which it advances, feels like it's getting quicker and quicker, right? What used to, the amount of change that would take 10, 15 years now happens. It feels like in a year or 2 years or 3 years.
Yeah. And then the other thing is there are other unknown factors like quantum computing. I mean, nobody is able to stabilize qubits, but if qubits can solve something that would take the normal processing systems like 1,000 years to do in about seconds, you were like, okay, wow, that could change the game entirely. And then there is a known entity that's coming out, which is robotic. I mean, and this is more in the physical field. Like robots can do much better than what humans are doing. And there's a race to figure out who leads that segment, and that can change the upend of planning, because if humans don't have to plan and robots can plan by themselves, maybe all of the human factors of trying to sabotage our own capabilities, which we are very good at, might be out of the window. But at the same time, human intelligence does so many other things that today robots can't. But there is a big push in robotics. I mean, I was just looking at a company today that's raising like $500 million, Aptronic or something, to drive robots in all kinds of spaces that people hadn't thought of. But that's an evolving field. And if you look at Huang Jensen, he's talking today, he's also betting big on robotic being the next foray for their company and their chips. Whether it happens or not, we'll see.
Yeah. Now, like for the average listener who's listening in, what career advice would you give them today, right? Like, let's imagine it's somebody coming brand new into their career who's just starting out.
I would say that your your hard skills, like whether it's software coding or anything else, is commodity. Even AI is getting commoditized. I mean, there's an LLM coming out every day that beats the capability of the previous one that came the last day. So it's like, how are you going to apply it to real life situations? Because if you look at the AI landscape, and I could be wrong, but for now, it's really in customer service and marketing that you see the most impact or trial of it, right, for success. And there's a lot of glitches. I mean, and things can only get better. I mean, I'm sure Anaplan in 2010 wasn't as good as Anaplan in 2016. So, but
Yeah.
that progression in 6 years is nowadays in 2 years. So you might see that AI, agentic AI, or another version of AI can become really good at what it does in those spaces. But then you have a whole bunch of other spaces like manufacturing, legal, finance, that can be upended but hasn't been touched yet, because you certainly have some system of record concerns, or can you make sure that whatever is output is 100% right? And people forget that while AI is expected to be 100% perfect, humans themselves are not, and whatever is going into AI systems has the same bias as human beings do.
That's a good point too. And what you mentioned was interesting. The hard skills are being commoditized. So then, what skills should someone be developing in this moment? Like,
So,
what is the differentiating factor for a person, like getting their career going?
So I think whether it's robots or humans running the shop, business has never changed, right? If you look at the era of all of the first gen, second gen, third gen, fourth gen industrial revolution, or the current revolution, it's always about, unfortunately, the almighty money. Are you making money? Are you making it at a good margin? And are you giving something back in return to the people who have bet on you? So if you can fulcrum your thoughts around how you can make changes in one of those areas using the hard tools that are available today, you're golden. And that's where I think, it's helped me in my career, because I say it's translated across industries, because I go like, these are some of the skills that you just apply, and the hard technology might be advanced in a industry, and another industry might be catching up. For example, fast moving consumer goods, P&G, we were at the leading edge of many things, follow the sun models or SAP standardization or whatever else. But when I moved to pharma, Merck, 8 years later, what they were talking about innovation sounded like, I've been there, done that like 10 years ago.
Yeah, that is quite fascinating. One of the things I think when we met for dinner recently, like we were talking about just that, right, is how different industries kind of progress in different rates. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's all a matter of risk and aversion, as well as what the rule of the law is, right? I mean, if you look at pharma and healthcare, they're very regulated. They're very fragmented too, because a lot of people just think healthcare is monolithic, but there's like the providers, payers. The payers are more insurance companies which have different objectives. The providers are hospitals and stuff. They have different objectives. And you have the pharmacy benefit providers, middlemen, and everything else. So it makes it complex. Whereas if you're looking at, say, fast moving consumer goods, it's regulated too, but it's a lot less, because at the end of the day, toothpaste is toothpaste. If you say it's much more than fluoride, then you're just kidding yourself, right? Because obviously you put a lot of flavors to make it palatable, but at the end of the day, toothpaste is fluoride. But why is Crest better than Colgate? Because of marketing and brand.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah, and sometimes you even have these brands out there that it's the guys, right? Where like the one or two big companies operate these several different brands, but it's just the illusion of choice.
Yeah, I mean, and it happens in the tech industry too, right? Intel dominated the conductor market. Cisco dominated networking. I mean, Google dominated search. I mean, it's like you generally find a dominant player, NVIDIA right now, for example. But I've never forgotten what leadership in Procter & Gamble told me. There's only two moments of truth. And front office wise, marketing calls it brand recognition or brand equity, and sales calls it customer acquisition or customer retention. But they are both the same thing. The first moment of truth is brand recognition or customer acquisition. It becomes easy when somebody without any help can name your product, the brand, right? Like somebody says toothpaste and you say Crest. Well, the person is going to buy Crest regardless of how many other brands are sitting on that store shelf, because their mind says, for me, toothpaste is Crest, or laundry is Tide,
Yep.
or tissue paper is Kleenex.
Kleenex. That's a classic one. Yeah.
Close association, or like even for technology, right? Search means Google. It takes a lot to achieve that. And Intel, I'll use that as a company. I mean, nobody ever saw an Intel chip, but everybody in the 90s and all would want to see the Intel Inside sticker on any computer they were buying. If it did not say Intel Inside, it didn't matter who made the computer, they would not buy it. But if you ask them what did Intel look like, they had no idea. They never opened the computer to look at what exactly is inside that Intel has, right?
Yeah.
But if you get to that, that's brand recognition, unaided, right? If it's aided, it's okay too. Aided meaning, hey, if you say toothpaste, the person is blanking. You say Crest, Colgate, Promise, and they pick one. But once people land on that brand, right, people think the job is done. The second moment of truth is the most important, that if they like how the product performed for them, then it's an automatic sale. And that's where people forget that brand equity or customer retention is key, not customer acquisition and brand recognition. Those are important. You need to get people through the door, but if they're revolving right out, it doesn't help you, because it takes a lot to get those two things first, right? But the second moment of truth makes it a business that has got huge margins, because you're humming along and people say, hey, I love it, I just don't want to switch from it. Not easily.
Yeah, that is quite fascinating. Now, if we kind of want to pivot a little bit into now your startup experience. So, as a startup chief customer officer, what are some of those? You mentioned like some of the skill sets that you've transferred along. Now, in this journey, what are some of those skill sets that you feel have kind of made its way to the forefront for you? And can you talk a little bit about what that experience is like of kind of being at the forefront of a company?
Well, I mean, if it's a very early stage startup, which is where I'm at, you are the CCO, CEO, the janitor, and everything else. But coming back to it, I'm managing all the front office. So the biggest thing which has never changed is, how do you build the trust in the first 5 minutes or less, right? Because they always say after that you can have a presentation for 55 minutes, but if in 5 minutes you didn't resonate with the person, or even the 20-second elevator pitch, as I call it, you're done from a standpoint of being able to drive business for the company. I mean, I'll leave the technology to my other founder, who's more focused on building the product and the engineering and all. Can I dabble in it? Yes, but I'm focused more on the customer, and I look at it as customer being sales, marketing, customer success, customer support, all of that, right? It should be not siloed. Obviously, in an early stage company, it's not, but even later, even when I was at Anaplan, I thought that was odd to keep segmenting it. I mean, I know for functionality you might, but for user experience, you shouldn't, right? Or a customer experience. So I think that is what I've brought to the table. People intuitively know that I'm a subject matter expert on manufacturing and can talk about how AI can help, because I break it down again into what humans learn best in threes. Anything over 3 is a challenge. Anything over 7 is just like a muddle. They don't know what to prioritize. So I always tell them, in manufacturing, you care about only 3 things. Throughput, which is your revenue, volume. If you said you wanted to make 10 cars, are you making 10 cars or not? Second is, say you're not making 10 cars, you want to figure out what the gaps are and fix it. That's fine. That's your productivity or efficiency and all to get volume and through, which ties to the revenue. Salespeople have to sell it, but you're producing it. Then the second thing is first time right, which is quality. Like you made, say, 8 cars, but were all 8 ready to be sold, or 5 of them had to go for rework, or they had too much material used and you wasted a lot of material, which means you gave up your margin. That's quality. Then the third thing is safety and ergonomics, because yes, you can have the best volume, the best quality metrics, but if people are not safe or are getting injured in the workplace, well, guess what? Your plant's going to get shut down. So if you do those 3 things right, everything else fits into that. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't other things, but those are the 3. And which 3 things impact those? It's people or robots on the floor. It's your material, which is moving around generally, like work in process, and it goes through stations and all of that, and the machines that operate in your plant floor. So it's a complexity of 9, but I've broken it down into 3 things that you need to look for in terms of your efficiency and all, and 3 outcomes that you want. And that's how I'm able to build that quick rapport to say, can you give us a chance to pilot? Obviously, they might have other priorities, budgets, and all of that. You don't win all the deals, but hey, at least they go like, yeah, you know what you're talking about. I'm really excited. And I don't need a presentation for this generally. I don't have a PPT slide starting off. I just talk this and then say, if you're interested, then we'll go through a slide deck and a demo.
Yeah, it really sounds like you've gone the art. It's like the art of the possible, right? Like you can kind of go in, build a rapport, get the relationship. Once they're at the table, then you go through art of the possible, see if this is what the customer's looking for, right? And that's usually, I mean, the legwork pretty much is right there, right? And then once you've gone through that, then it's just a matter of like, hey, here's the paperwork.
And like I said, right, when you get strategic and get them hooked on those 3 things and they resonate, the devil is always in the details. You have to go through the demo and all of that, but you will never get that chance if you don't resonate there. And you're probably, I would say less than a minute, tell them those 3 things. And then, of course, the devil is in the details even for us too, right? They might not have a budget, or their priorities might have changed, or some boss said, well, I bless this project, now I unbless it. All those things happen.
Yeah. Now, do you find that, like what you were mentioning earlier, is the idea of like the brand recognition, right? Like the Crest or the Kleenex or the Googles of the world, right? But if you're not one of those, how do you see a company then? Like, does that mean you have to spend more heavily on sales, like cold calling? Does that mean you're running more ads? Like, what are some of those signs that a company doesn't have that? And do you find that you have to compensate in some other way?
Well, think about it as our startup, right? Sensible. Who would know what sensible is? So we have to do a lot more around mining your networks first to be able to get those early customers. Because if you look at where you are in the journey, as an early stage startup, you're not trying to get more than 5, 10 customers first. before you get to your next round.
Mm.
Because if you get 100, you're just going to bury
Yeah, can't
yourself in
service
failure.
them. Yeah, yeah.
So you've got to know what your target is, and then there you plumb your net. Say you get to the Series A or pre-Series B, you're still trying to engage with the product market fit and see if the market is fast moving, which unfortunately manufacturing is not as compared to other areas. So you then have to set your expectations. Say, maybe you need to get to your next 20 customers in the pipeline. Then you start to do some SDR work or cold calling and reach out to specific targets, profiles that you have built in your network, saying those things resonate and work. And it could also be size of company, right? Because the bigger companies normally take a long lead time to close because there's a lot of people who are decision makers in them, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of vectors that come in to figure that out. But once you hit that Series B and then you go from a startup to a scale up, as I like to call it, then you need to see that hockey stick. Then you're trying to bring in a bunch of resources within your own company to do that sales motion and marketing motions to be able to succeed. You probably at that point also think about having a CFO that can keep the money counting, and you're always raising, right? You never stop. So I'm talking about a startup journey. But if you're not there and you're in services, it's the same journey, but it's a different outcome, because in startups, you have a promise of investment and maybe not care that much about customer revenue. You have to show it though. Whereas in services, you're waiting for that PO to drop in before you'll do any work. Because the
Right.
services business is all about, I have got to get the contract and then I bring it in. I mean, I might be able to manage a small bench depending on my growth, but I can't have a huge bench. Whereas in a startup, it almost looks like everybody's on the bench because you're getting investment dollars to build a differentiated product that sells in the market. High failure rate here, of course, because if your product doesn't resonate in the market or any n number of things happen, your startup grounds itself or gets sold or whatever else. In a services business, you always know it's a cash business. You're getting contracts and then you're trying to manage it. If you're not managing your margin well, it's just because you probably had too much of like build on the ready to go side versus having contracts.
No, you mentioned earlier the three pillars of business, right? You got revenue, you got margin, you got free cash flow.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at this from the startup lens, revenue, I think, is a pretty easy concept to understand. Margin is relatively simple to understand. When you talk about free cash flow in the different stages of a startup, what does that mean to you in terms of, there's obviously levers like runway, right? You got to make sure there's enough cash to be able to fund the operations.
Yeah.
You could be pre-revenue, right? So how does that all work? Sometimes people go into debt financing. You got investors, cloud, angel investors, right? So explain this kind of landscape of how that rolls.
So best thing, whether you're bootstrapped or whether you're raising money, is to say, you mentioned it, right? Runway. So say you yourself have $1 million, you put it in. You're saying, if I hire 2 people and myself and I project my salary for a year and theirs, and then all the other work we have to do, you can come up with a run rate of saying, my burn rate is going to be in 10 months, I'm out of $1 million. So within that, if you're pre-product, pre-revenue, which we were in Sensible, how do you build a product, make sure it gets to market, and then you have some revenue streaming, which has some metrics associated with it that other investors might come in, whether they're angel investors, or you might bootstrap and say, I've gotten my next 10 million that I want to put in because I am Mark Zuckerberg. I can put in my own money. Doesn't matter whether you're bootstrapping or getting some other person's money. You're always looking at, did I hit the metric and the milestone? Because even if I'm the billionaire Mark Zuckerberg, I'm not going to put into a business that's going nowhere or has no possible way of putting some metrics saying, am I achieving it or not? The same way you would run Facebook or Meta today, right? You have to bring it down to a micro level, but the same parameters apply. The complexity might be different, but the same parameters apply. And then you're trying to drive that. When you're in a services business, right? Like what you're doing, then you're looking at saying, what is my stickiness of that revenue? Same thing here in product company too, but much more stickiness. Am I able to complete all the contracts? What's my overruns? Because I might have estimated something and it's taking me more. Generally, it never takes less, more. And I'm going I'm not making my margins, which crimps your free cash flow, because you're thinking, hey, I can grow faster or invest in something else with that money, like in marketing or scale up or open 5 more offices. All those things start creeping in, right, on both sides. But here, you're really looking at your overruns versus you're looking at my burn rate to figure out how to look at where the next investment is going to come from. And am I meeting the metrics, the bare minimum metrics, if not more, to be able to drag those people in? And then at the end of the day, many of these things work with connections too, because as much as we talk about AI, robotics, and everything else, humans still interact with each other, and trust sometimes opens doors that no amount of metrics can.
I like how you brought it back to, you ultimately bring it back to the people and relationships involved.
I mean, without that, it's just a facade, right? I mean, someday maybe robots will rule all of us and we'll be sitting here like vegetables taking orders from them. But till that time, the human brain is still the most powerful and exciting thing to crack, because there's no one way you can crack any human being's brain. You're wired differently than I am.
Yeah.
and so is everybody else.
Yeah. And I think that that's true if you're talking with customers, that's true if you're talking to colleagues, that's true if you're talking about partners. Like, yeah, I feel like that's transferable across all realms of life.
Yeah. And I'm talking generalities, right? But all these things are like common sense, right? And I always think about it saying common sense is the least common when it's most needed. We all get
Mm,
too antsy about situations. Oh, the red is flashing and everybody has to throw their hands at it. But nobody thinks through saying, what can we do that can mitigate the red and never get into that situation?
mm,
Or even when we are in that situation, most of the times, if you let your common sense rule, like mindfulness and calmness is very difficult to do. It's
mm.
easy to talk it, but
Oh,
when
yeah,
you're there,
yeah.
you'll realize the solution is incrementally possible versus trying to say, I've got to put out this fire right now. That's not going to happen. You first have to
Yeah.
put a ring around the fire, like just like firemen do, right? Ring around the fire, contain it, then slowly let it burn out, and then you douse it out, and so on and so forth. You do all of them together, but still time, right? And then you got to have a strategy. You just can't say fire, let's everybody jump into the fire. Well, guess what? You're all going to be singed, burnt, or die jumping into the fire.
Yeah. Yeah. Now this kind of sense of calm that you bring about, where does that stem from for you? Is it something you practice like meditation or is it some other like
Well,
areas
I
of
mean, different avenues, right? So you hit on it, right? I don't like to sit and meditate, so I bike every day if I can, 16
Mm,
miles, and I try to do one of the mantras from the Hindu religion, Gayatri mantra, and try to see how many times I can focus on that versus all the other stuff that wants to come into the brain. I still don't stop it because many times the good solutions have come when I'm biking. I'm
mm.
sitting there and trying to knock myself dead, trying to figure out what the answer is, and this is the answer, right? And I'm biking here, and now I know what the answer is.
It's one of
So
the best
that I
feelings,
do.
isn't it?
And then
Yeah.
I look at release valves, right? I mean, I do teach at a couple of community colleges. So that helps me imbibe how the new generation is learning and moving around, right? So it gives you wider perspectives. You don't want to sit, like you said, right, in a tunnel vision. You expand your horizon saying, how did things change? These people grew up with technology. Maybe you didn't. How are they doing things differently? So that education avenue gives me a lot rather than me being a teacher. It also tells me a lot about what I need to do to adapt. So all these things bring a sense of calm and achievement. Of course, do I want to be the Bill Gates or the Elon Musks of the world in terms of being riches? Maybe yes, or maybe not. Right? What motivates me is different.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating, and I think that's a great place to kind of transition into. I would say, if you were to leave the audience with one kind of nugget of wisdom, I know we've talked a lot about what goes into business, revenue, COGS, your margin. You have your free cash flow. We talked about the importance of relationships, the future of AI, a lot of different areas. But if there's one piece of advice or nugget you would leave the audience with today, what?
So I would say the fundamental premise of what we do as human beings has never changed. We have got waves of new things like AI or industrial revolution and all, but the fundamental premise of what we do as humans has not changed. So be yourself, and what they say is, chase your passion. But remember, in this world, money talks. As much as we don't like it to, and maybe there's another world
Mm,
that's coming because before it was knowledge, now it's money. Make sure the passion has an ability to stabilize you in your life to the extent that you think your life has to unfold in a certain way. Because like I said, right, I'm not one who goes into, beyond Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't need to have 5 cars and 15 bungalows or a huge
sure.
following to tell me that I am worth something. Right? But it's what you define for yourself. Be that yourself and figure out at the end of the day that passion can drive money. My passion right now, if you explain, I mean, I do all this. Corporate America might someday say, you're too old, not in those words directly, but we need to spit you out because they're younger bucks that can do the work that you do. I have my education, teaching, and all that to fall back. Or maybe something else. I might do like a radiology and say, I might take care of respiratory therapy is one I was thinking of. Take care of infants in the NICU or something like that. Something that keeps me engaged beyond just saying I'm a one horse or one pony trick kind of person, right? Meaning I can only do this work and I can't do other things or evolve myself into other things.
Sage words of wisdom, Subbu. Well, really appreciate you joining the
Sure.
conversation today, and I think the audience will find this to be a treat and a lot of wisdom and nuggets to be garnished.
Glad to help in any small way I can. And of course, people can always find me all the time on LinkedIn if they want to connect. And once they connect, they already know my personal email and number that are on the contact info. There's no other way to reach me. So, whatever I can do to help or be helped, because that's another thing. Experiences teach you a lot. Sitting on your couch and ruminating about things does not generally. It only leads to depression, maybe.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure having you on, Subbu, and always great to catch up.
Same here.
All
Thanks,
right.
Danish.
Take
Appreciate it.
care.